This is the Stephen A. Smith Show podcast.
I'm Stephen A. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the latest edition of the Stephen A. Smith Show, coming at you as I love to do on ESPN Radio every weekday in 250 markets across the United States of America, and of course, ESPN Radio, Sirius XM style, channel 80. Number to call up as always is 888-729-3776. That's 888-SAY-ESPN. It's time for Straight Talk, brought to you by Straight Talk Wireless. Best phones, best networks, no contracts. Lots of stuff to get into today. We are approaching week 2 of the postseason. Some of these divisional playoff games that are scheduled to take place. Tennessee playing New England, Pittsburgh against Jacksonville. Of course, New Orleans versus Minnesota, and the Atlanta Falcons, going up against the Philadelphia Eagles. We'll get into that as the show progresses today. We'll also touch on some news that was made by Mr. Reggie Miller, Hall of Fame shooting guard for the Indiana Pacers, making news because of some suggestions he has made to Lakers President of Basketball Operations, Magic Johnson. We'll definitely get into that today as well. A potential new coach on the horizon for the New York Giants in the National Football League, Matt Patricia, defensive coordinator for the New England Patriots. We'll talk about that, along with a bevy of other things as well, plus some continued residue from the national championship game that took place Monday night in the ATL Atlanta, Georgia, at the Mercedes-Benz Stadium, where Alabama overcame a 13-0 halftime deficit when Nick Saban decided to bench a quarterback that had gone 26-2 as a starter, going to just fresh off of taking you to the national championship game a year earlier and taking you to back-to-back national championship games. Nick Saban benched him in favor of a freshman quarterback, and that freshman quarterback guided them to the national title. So it's a lot of stuff to get into today, but the first thing on my mind would happen to be Jon Gruden, former colleague now at ESPN, now the new head coach for the Oakland Raiders. 10 years, $100 million guaranteed contract. And apparently some people have a problem with the fact that I'm thinking a Super Bowl in 4 years, within 4 years, or bust. I don't think those expectations are too great. I really, really don't. You're Jon Gruden. Let's be clear. The story about an ownership stake, no matter how much he denies it, it was relevant. I believe the reporters that broke that story. A matter of fact, let me tell you what else I believe. I believed Jon Gruden asked for an ownership stake, and it was being considered. That's why he ended up with $100 million. Because if you're not going to give him ownership, you might as well give him the amount of dollars and a kind of lengthy guaranteed contract that makes you say, well, damn, he might as well be the owner. That's the kind of money he got. 10 years, $100 million. Incentives that could potentially push it to 120. The $100 million is fully guaranteed. That is more of a guarantee than a highest paid football player in the National Football League, or any coach for that matter. That includes Bill Belichick. It includes Mike Tomlin. It includes Mike McCarthy. It includes Andy Reid. The highest paid contract in the NFL. The only NFL figure getting paid more than Jon Gruden is Commissioner Roger Goodell. Now, you're Jon Gruden. Let me be the first to say, I love the kind of stuff that I've read about him, the kind of things that players are saying about him. We're hoping to have one of his former players on the phone with us in about 25 minutes or so. Hopefully we're able to pull that off. And it was great seeing him. There is no questioning his football acumen. There is no questioning his passion. There's no questioning that his personality seems fit for Raider Nation. Whether they're in Oakland or Las Vegas, it doesn't matter. When you think Raiders and you think the quintessential personality that should be the coach of this franchise, silver and black, just win, baby, the late Al Davis, and everything it personifies, in terms of belief, in terms of personality, in terms of aura, it is clearly Jon Gruden. Chucky, as they say. Because as Jerry Rice, who starred with the 49ers, who's universally recognized as the greatest receiver in the history of football, who went to a Super Bowl, who also played for Jon Gruden, while he was in Oakland, let's be clear. When he says Chucky is coming, you know he's coming. Quote from Jerry Rice. He can be your best friend or your worst enemy. That's going to keep you on your toes. And maybe that was something that the players, they were lacking this year. I hope these players are ready because they're going to get Chucky. They're going to get him. Chucky's going to come out. You know who Chucky is, isn't he? Remember that movie from years ago, ladies and gentlemen? That little doll, those horror flicks. The doll actually came to life, had like an evil spirit in him where he twist and tweak his face and all of this stuff. Well, Jon Gruden looks like Chucky. And damn it, some of the players say occasionally he'll act like Chucky. Now, does that parlay into success? It remains to be seen. I believe in the man. I'm happy he's getting a job. I'm happy he's getting his money. I was honored to call him a colleague here at ESPN. But I also have an obligation to be real in this regard. You haven't coached since 2008. That's 10 years. The 6 years prior to that, you spent as a coach in the National Football League, you were 45-51. With 2 playoff appearances. You lost both games. Your last 2 years in the NFL, you were 9-7. There is nothing about the resume that says $100 million, 10 years, fully guaranteed. There is nothing about the resume that says you should be paid more than the highest paid player in the National Football League, which at the moment is Matthew Stafford. There is nothing that says you should be paid more than Bill Belichick or Mike Tomlin or Sean Payton. Nothing. But you got it anyway. And so now that we look at it from that perspective, we got to analyze and say, okay, what's fair expectations? I say, look, what's wrong with the Super Bowl? And it ain't just because you got Derek Carr and Amari Cooper and Michael Crabtree and Jared Cook. It ain't just because you have these people. And by the way, it's a sad state of affairs in Oakland. When your leading receiver is Jared Cook, who had 688 yards. Second was Amari Cooper with 680. Third was Crabtree with 618. Your leading receiver with Derek Carr as your quarterback can't even have 700 yards on the year. That's pathetic. But I digress. My point is, Derek Carr can play. Those receivers can play. Beast Mode didn't have a bad year, still averaged more than 4 yards a carry. He didn't have a bad year. So when I look at it from that standpoint, when I look at it from that perspective, I'm here to tell y'all right now. You're Jon Gruden. What's wrong with the expectation? By the way, he's going to hire an offensive coordinator. He's got an offensive coordinator now. He introduced him yesterday. Greg Olson. That'll be his offensive coordinator. But guess what? It's a name only because Jon Gruden's the one calling the plays. Greg Olson won't be calling the plays. It'll be Jon Gruden calling the plays. So if Jon Gruden's calling the plays, he's putting a lot on his shoulders, which I love, by the way, because he ain't running from the responsibility. Props to Jon Gruden on that. But tell me why am I wrong to expect a Super Bowl championship in the next 4 years for a coach that signs for $100 million? I know luck has to come into the equation. I know you got to make sure you're not injured, but I'm talking about injuries aside. Assuming that all the necessary important parts are healthy and ready to go. What's wrong with expecting a Super Bowl? Nobody's really expecting Tom Brady to be around in 4 years. Big Ben Roethlisberger, he's a few months removed from saying maybe he doesn't have it anymore, even though he's changed his tune and now he's saying he'll be ready and he doesn't believe these playoffs will be his last game, indicating that he plans on coming back for 2018. So if all of that is the reality, what is wrong with expecting a Super Bowl championship within 4 years for a $100 million man who happens to be the coach? Who, no matter what he says, was looking for an ownership stake or at least used it as a leverage tool to get the $100 million from Oakland and owner Mark Davis, who's clearly not Al Davis. God rest his soul. The balance of power is shifting. It's not going to be what it once was. And Jon Gruden and the Oakland Raiders have the pieces necessary to be highly competitive. I see no reason why a Super Bowl within 4 years is a lofty expectation. I don't see the problem. If you do, let me know. 888-729-3776. That's 888-SAY-ESPN. This is Straight Talk Wireless, nationwide coverage on America's largest and most dependable 4G LTE networks. I really, really want to know. Because I got a problem with anybody who's got a problem with my expectation. As promised, we'll continue to discuss that. We'll get into the NFL playoffs. Plus, we'll get into what Reggie Miller had to say about Magic Johnson and how Magic Johnson may be wise to heed this Hall of Famer's words. You're listening live to the Stephen A. Smith Show on ESPN Radio.
Craving even more of Stephen A?
Him of all people!
For around-the-clock access to the man?
I'm Stephen A!
You can follow him on Twitter and Instagram at Stephen A. Smith and on Facebook at Stephen A.
I'll get into Reggie Miller and what he had to say about Magic Johnson on the Dan Patrick Show yesterday in just a little bit. But until then, I'll get to the calls. Let's go to Mike in Denver. You're live with Stephen A. What's up, Mike? How are you? Good afternoon. How you doing? What's up?
I'm doing fine, man. Just wanted to talk about Jon Gruden. Like you said, 4 years is more than enough time for them to try to get to the Super Bowl. I'm expecting them to be in the playoffs next year. You got weapons already, and you got a good quarterback in place. What do you think?
Well, listen, what I'm saying is that you've got the quarterback is the most important position. You're going to be calling the offensive plays. Obviously, defense is a problem because all you got is Khalil Mack. Bruce Irvin and others are on the squad, but really you got to improve that defense. But more importantly, you got to expect more from the offense of what they gave you this year. Derek Carr wasn't himself after signing for $125 million. Amari Cooper didn't look like the stud he's looked like over the previous 2 years. Michael Crabtree didn't look that great either. None of them looked awful, but they clearly underachieved. And if the most important position is the quarterback spot and you've got that covered, what's the problem? That's the way I look at it. I mean, if you look at the issues that Jon Gruden had in the past, when he first landed in Oakland, you had Gerback and stuff before you ended up getting, oh my goodness, I got brain lock here. Rich Gannon. So you had Rich Gannon, all right, but you ultimately leave to go to Tampa and you grab and you get Brad Johnson. Even though Rich Gannon was big time for those 3 seasons he was in Oakland. Let me tell you something right now. Derek Carr's supposed to be big time. And you should be able to do something, particularly with New England potentially not being what we're accustomed to them being because Tom Brady ain't going to be there forever. And Big Ben Roethlisberger isn't going to be in Pittsburgh forever. What's the problem?
Right. The Raiders, they underachieved this year, but I'm looking for them to bounce back next year. And then, like you said, with Jon Gruden calling plays and at being the captain now, I'm expecting the Raiders to be real good next year. And if they don't, then, $100 million, you might want to look somewhere else. So I'm going to keep an eye on it, man. And, glad to talk to you. And I'm going to listen to the rest of the show.
Thanks a lot, man. I appreciate it. Let's go to Jared in Illinois. You're live with Stephen A. Go ahead, Jared.
Mr. Smith, how are you doing, sir?
How are you? Go ahead.
I'm well, thank you. Hey, let me give you a little bit of background. My whole day is spent classifying and declassifying assets based on liability. So I guess my question would be this. In a sales aspect, if Gruden is to be able to warrant a $100 million contract for the next 10 years, what does Reggie McKenzie really think he's actually worth?
Well, listen, what does Reggie McKenzie think who's actually worth?
Gruden. Because stop.
McKenzie has nothing to do with Gruden being in Oakland. The fact of the matter is McKenzie's trying to keep his job. Mark Davis is the owner for the Oakland Raiders. Gruden is synonymous with Raider Nation. They love him. So Gruden was going to be back. I mean, if I'm McKenzie, I'm lucky and fortunate that I'm still there now that Gruden's there. Because let's be real and honest about something here. Nobody's telling Gruden what to do. Gruden's running the Raiders organization. You can slice that any way you want to. Don't think for 1 second. Now, you might have people, over you who are really under you who are doing the legwork, but you're making the decisions. You tell me one person who's in a position to tell Gruden what to do right now for Oakland?
Nobody.
Nobody.
You got a good point.
Nobody. So, listen, it's not about Reggie because he ain't making any points. He's not making any decisions about Gruden. This is Gruden's call. You don't sign a coach to a 10-year, $100 million guaranteed contract with incentives that pump it up to 120 potentially, and then sit up there and say you got to follow instructions. You have placed the faith in your franchise in his hands. Raider Nation wants him, at least for the foreseeable future. Jon Gruden is the man for the Oakland Raiders. He's the one making the calls.
I agree with that completely. But at what point does this fall back on McKenzie if this does not work?
Well, again, that's Gruden's call. Because if Gruden doesn't believe that he's doing the job, then he's going to be gone. Mark Davis and them ain't going to get in Gruden's way. Not after you paid him this money. You're not getting in his way. So it's all about whether or not McKenzie does what Gruden wants him to do. It's right. That simple.
First rule before I ever fire anybody is to ask myself, have I done everything to make this person successful? So you're telling me all Gruden has to say is no, they haven't?
Well, what I'm saying to you is if you're Mark Davis and you make that kind of commitment to somebody, you can't get in their way. You've allocated their responsibility to them by virtue of what you're paying them. So you can't get in their way. I'm not saying Gruden's going to get rid of him. I have no idea how he feels about McKenzie or anybody else. What I'm saying is, if you pay somebody that kind of money, you can't then turn around and say, well, we need you to listen to this guy and this guy and that guy. By the way, Gruden he's the highest paid coach in history, right? Right, Jared? Not only is he the highest paid coach, Pete Carroll has a GM in John Snyder, where Pete Carroll makes the personnel decisions. Bill Belichick's making the personnel decisions. If you're going to pay Jon Gruden more than the both of them, how the hell are you going to then turn around and say, but you got lesser power? Does that make sense to you?
Hey, I've always been taught, take one thing, money or power. Always take the power, right?
I got you. Well, what if you got both?
Then it's a good day.
I'm telling you, he's got both. There's no way he doesn't have both. There's no way.
Thank you, sir.
Take it easy. 888-729-3776. It's 888-SAY-ESPN. We'll continue to take these calls about Jon Gruden and Oakland Raiders. Am I right to have the expectations of a Super Bowl championship within 4 years? I don't see any problem with that. I think that's definitely plausible. Of course, injuries aside and things of that nature. You get injured, all bets are off. Your quarterback goes down, all bets are off. But the personnel that you have in place, all right, well, along with Jon Gruden being who he is, assuming he'll improve the roster, I see no reason to expect anything less than a Super Bowl title within 4 years. I don't see the problem. I don't see why anybody would see the problem. But that's just me.
You're listening to the Stephen A. Smith Show podcast.
Before I get back to the calls, I wanted y'all to be aware of a comment that Reggie Miller made. Obviously, in the last few days, you've heard the news in regards to LeVar Ball talking about Lakers coach Luke Walton. He said that he's too young, that you can see that he can't connect with the players, that he's not the man for the job, and they're not going to win with Luke Walton as the coach, et cetera, et cetera. I'm paraphrasing because I don't have the direct quote in front of me, but that's essentially what LeVar Ball had to say about Lakers coach Luke Walton. We heard Luke Walton respond that you don't pay any attention to it. We've heard nothing from Irvin Magic Johnson. We've heard nothing from Rob Pelinka. But others have chimed in. Rick Carlisle, president of the National Basketball Coaches Association, blamed not just LeVar Ball for his idiocy and classlessness, but he blamed ESPN, called it disgraceful, and fundamental rules of journalism have been violated. You've heard my position on that. Stan Van Gundy chimed in. He blamed ESPN, and he's having a game, I think, on ESPN. I think it's January 19th, and supposedly he will take action then in terms of denying ESPN access or whatever else he chooses to do. I respect the hell out of Stan Van Gundy as well, but I respectfully disagree with him as well. And then, of course, there's Steve Kerr, two-time champion as coach of the Golden State Warriors. Very, very good and decent man, not just a damn great coach. He's a good man. He's very, very thoughtful. He had some things to say as well and essentially called LeVar the Kardashian of sports, but, talked about how executives for ESPN have forced folks to cover LeVar Ball. Of course, Frank Isola, Knicks beat writer, columnist for New York Daily News as well, does an outstanding job for many, many years. He's also a personal friend of mine. He put out a tweet essentially talking about Stan Van Gundy, Rick Carlisle, Steve Kerr, and those guys, and, their willingness to broach politics. But somehow, some way, you got a problem with a dad talking about his son and who he plays for. Pointing out the hypocrisy there. Reggie Miller, Hall of Fame shooting guard for the Indiana Pacers for many years, outstanding analyst for TNT, was on a Dan Patrick show yesterday. And I think it was yesterday or the day. But he had some very, very interesting things to say about what should happen in regards to LeVar Ball as the Lakers, and in particular, Magic Johnson, is concerned. Listen to what Reggie Miller had to say.
He could really destroy LeVar if he really wanted to. I've become close to almost threatening, if you keep opening your mouth, we're going to trade your son. We are going to trade your son from the Lakers. So it's one of the two things. Shut up, fall in line, let Luke do what he's got to do, and let Lonzo play how Lonzo wants to play, or we'll start taking calls. Magic Johnson, the Magic Johnson has to say that.
Yeah.
Not Luke. But this is a chance for Magic Johnson to be like, you gotta shut up, dude. I don't know who you think you are. You gotta shut up.
Reggie Miller is not wrong. It would just be a sad, sad day if that happened. Because the first order of business is to understand that Lonzo Ball has done nothing to deserve this, meaning being put in this situation. One of the reasons why I've calmed down about Lonzo Ball is because I have compassion. And the reason why I bring that up is because I want you all to take a moment to imagine, just close your eyes for a moment and imagine that you have a highly loquacious, forceful, eccentric father who craves attention, who's so imposing that he could sit up there and not just pull his own kids out of a game, but pull an entire team off the floor and say, we ain't playing just because he don't like the way the referee is officiating a game. That's your dad. It's the man who raised you, fed you, clothed you, kept a roof over your head, clothes on your back, took care of you, and obviously is very forceful and very demanding. You're Lonzo Ball. What are you supposed to do? First of all, in all likelihood, you're probably intimidated by him because boys are usually intimidated by their daddies. You're a dad and I ain't say a father, I said a daddy. Meaning a person that is there for you, that has been there for you all your life. That has unquestionably established himself as the boss. Because in fairness to a LeVar Ball, although I'm nothing like him and I have daughters, not sons, let me be very, very clear. I'm daddy. This is not a democracy. I'm the boss. And you will do what I say as my child. But that doesn't mean that I would act that way. And it doesn't mean that I would be that way once they turn 18, 19, 20, etc. You got to have confidence in who you raise. But I'm not telling anybody how to raise their kid. I'm simply saying that as a father, your default position is to understand that you provide and you protect. And as a result, you're the boss. Lonzo Ball being in that position, that's a tough spot, man. But it's his cross to bear because one or two things are going on here. Folks are going to look at Lonzo Ball and think that he's talking behind their back to his daddy. And they're going to look at him as suspect, or they're going to look at him as weak because he's scared to stand up to his dad and tell his dad to pipe it down. Either scenario gets helped by Magic Johnson coming out. Not against LeVar Ball, but in support of Luke Walton. Unless, of course, you're not interested in supporting Luke Walton because you're Irvin Magic Johnson and you never hired him in the first place. You see how interesting this story is getting? Think about that one.
Guess what?
You're in the middle of the Stephen A. Smith Show podcast.
Damn it, I mean it!
You know, before I get back to the callers, let me say this. New York Giants, Indianapolis Colts, and others, they're not the only team. New York Giants are looking at both offensive coordinator Josh McDaniels and defensive coordinator Matt Patricia for the New England Patriots. McDaniels is also a candidate in Indianapolis. Patricia's also a candidate in Detroit. Coaches coming from the Bill Belichick tree are well respected. Nevertheless, he's the one that has had success. Patricia seems to be the right man for the job, it appears. Presentation notwithstanding. Looks a little scraggly, what have you. You know, they usually like that more polished look, but hell. Bill Belichick, I'm sorry, Bill Parcells was your coach before. Jim Fossil was your coach before. Ben McAdoo has been your coach with his chubby Pat Riley looking wannabe self. Doesn't really matter. You know, the bearded look on Patricia, who cares? Got a degree in aeronautics? I don't know. New York Daily News clearly is making the case for him to be the next head coach. At least one particular writer is, and more power to him because he may be right. I look at the Giants, and I think their biggest problem is on offense, not defense. I think if Eli Apple, who's gone through an awful lot this year on a personal level, can get his head right and get focused, and I'm not knocking him, because remember, he's had legitimate reasons to be a bit distracted, no question about it. But I think if he can get himself focused, I think their defense will be just fine, especially if your offense is able to give you something. Odell Beckham Jr., if he makes a full recovery, you get Eli Manning some protection on the offensive line, you get some semblance of a running game, I think the Giants will be just fine. On offense, that's where their problem lies. So bringing in a defensive-minded coach, one could make the argument that's a plus because the history of your success has been associated with great defenses because Bill Parcells was your head coach and Bill Belichick was your defensive coordinator. The flip side to it, however, is that offense is such a problem that anybody that prioritizes that might be the way to go. I don't know. I just knew that Ben McAdoo needed to go. Gettleman, personal relationships with players, whatever the case may be, didn't work out well. I always hold Josh Norman against him. But that's about it. Other than that, Gettleman has done a damn good job as an executive in Carolina. And he didn't hire Ron Rivera, but he kept him on board, and it appeared to be the right decision. You don't run into Von Miller in Denver, you're the Super Bowl champions. It's clear that Gettleman knows what he's doing. It's clear that Gettleman is hardcore. And if you got a guy from the Bill Belichick tree, chances are they're hardcore too. As long as they're not trying to be Bill Belichick like Josh McDaniels tried to do in Denver, you shouldn't have a problem. And Josh McDaniels tried to do that when he was 34. He's a 41-year-old man now. He's older. He's learned his lesson. Chances are he'll be better for it. But Patricia seems to be somebody that's his own guy and won't try to emulate someone else. I don't know whether he's the right man for the job. I just knew that Ben McAdoo was the wrong guy. We shall see. We shall see. Either way you slice it, this thing of feeling the need to pluck somebody from the Belichick tree, I mean, Patricia and the Patriots had the number one ranked defense last year, but that ain't the case this year. Matter of fact, somebody looked at the New England Patriots and they would say, leaves a lot to be desired. This year, however, they are ranked 5th in points, but 29th in yards allowed. Last year, they were number 1, number 8 in yards allowed. Year before that, they were number 10 in points allowed. Year before that, they were 8. Year before that, they were 10th. So over the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, now 6 years, they've been a top 10 defense in points allowed. But in that same span, ladies and gentlemen, 3 times they ranked 25th or worst in yards allowed. That's Matt Patricia's record as defensive coordinator. Not to mention the fact that Bill Belichick has a defensive background. So chances are, how much were you doing? Because even though Bill Belichick ain't calling the plays, who knows what he's doing compared to what Matt Patricia's doing? Whereas with Gruden, he takes over the job in Oakland. He's clearly calling the offensive plays. See, all of these things are just questions. It's not doubts, not critiques, just questions. They're worthy of being asked. 888-729, that's 888-SAY-ESPN. Back to the calls we go. Carlton in Tampa. My buddy, how are you, man?
Oh, Lord, I had 3 quick points on 3 issues, but now I got 4.
Oh, sure.
Okay. McDaniels was fired by the Bolin family in the Broncos for cheating, for filming the 49ers practice over in London. And Patricia wore the Goodell clown shirt while he was a member of the New England Patriots.
That is true.
Those are 2 reasons why somebody might not want to.
Hold on, Carlton. Wasn't that during the parade?
No, it was coming off the Patriots plane from one of their games, He gets depicted, he's walking down the gangplank with a Goodell clown t-shirt on.
That's not a reason to keep him from getting a job, though, Carlton.
It shows bad judgment. It shows really stupid, poor judgment.
No, you're wrong there, Carlton. It doesn't show stupidity. It might show defiance. It might show disrespect. Not necessarily stupidity. What happened to Matt Patricia because of that?
Well, but now that he's aiming for a head coach job, some owners might say, I don't want the leader of my team as a guy depicting the commissioner as a clown.
And some of them might not care because some of them might feel the same way about the commissioner.
No, most of the owners lined up against the Patriots in Deflategate. But my second point, this weekend's game, Patriots game, is the second biggest tomato can playoff game they have ever had, the number 1 game being against Tim Tebow in 2011 when Tebow completed all of 9 passes and they lost 45-10. And I love Tim Tebow, but man, he could not throw a football to save his life. Point number 3, it's not a surprise that the lunatic left, as best epitomized by Max Kellerman, believes that there should be no standards, no meritocracy, no demand of achievement from a guy making $100 million a year. Because they believe everybody should just get paid $100 million and not produce anything. But Stephen A., you do not want to work for Max, because if you contradict their snowflake, microaggression obsessed agenda, they will purge you, my friend. So
you know what? That might be a good point, but just so everybody knows what you're talking about, you were watching First Take this morning, and Max Kellerman was against my perspective that Jon Gruden should be able to deliver me a title within 3 to 4 years if you're going to sign for $100 million. Max's definition of success was winning a division and winning a playoff game, and he feels that should be enough to warrant that $100 million. I was like, hell no, I need a hell of a lot more than that. If you're getting $100 million, especially when you haven't coached in 10 years, you're 45 and 51 the 6 previous years to that, and you went 0-2 in the playoffs. No, I need a Super Bowl title to justify a $100 million contract for a coach. That was the difference between me and Max.
$100 million for one playoff win is not exactly a reasonable expectation, but that's Max's. So anyway, point number 4. I generally agree with Will Cain 95% of the time. You and I had that discussion in the past. And I agree with him that LeVar Ball is a carnival barker, snake oil salesman fraud. But I vehemently disagree with his point today where he said that Steve Kerr is being a hypocrite because Kerr comments on politics and then objects to ESPN following the Ball family ad nauseum. And here's what I'm going to say is a vast difference. If Steve Kerr spent 50% of his press conferences and 50% of the time that he corresponds with the media talking about politics, well, then maybe Will Cain would be right. But the difference is you folks are obsessed with the Ball family. You have sections on your website called The Ball Talk and The Ball Family. You have become the promotional vehicle for this darn family. And that's the difference. You are promoting the snake oil salesman or the carnival barker.
First of all,
the difference, my friend.
Time out. First of all, you sat up there and you called about this yesterday. And one of the reasons I vehemently disagreed with you is because it ain't everything and it ain't everybody. ESPN, we've got huge tentacles. We've got a tremendous tremendous amount of tentacles. Everybody ain't thinking about the same thing. You just told me something. Carlton, do you realize you called into this show and you just told me something I had absolutely positively no idea about? I didn't know that stuff. In other words, what you just described that ESPN has. The Ball family and following. I don't pay attention to that stuff. I'm doing this show. I'm doing First Take. I ain't pay attention to that. I don't know that. What I'm saying is when you say it, you can't say everybody. And ESPN has an abundance of arms. And by the way, when you bring up Steve Kerr, you want me to tell you something? I disagree with Will Cain about, I didn't say it on the air because we ran out of time, but I disagreed with him about Steve Kerr being a hypocrite as well. Do you know why? Because first of all, I don't think that Steve Kerr comments about that stuff extensively the way that folks try to give the impression about. Secondly, you may have asked him a question and he's simply showing you the courtesy of answering. And thirdly, and more importantly, if anybody has a license as a coach in professional sports to be political, it would be Steve Kerr because of what happened to his father and who his father was. And I think those are the kind of things that need to be taken into consideration, and we need not forget that. Last word, Carlton, real quick. Go ahead.
Well, the 82% in the poll today you ran on your show that said that you should pay less attention to the Ball family. It's not because they're interested in it. It's because they don't want any more promotion of the carnival barker, of the snake oil salesman. Mm-hmm. That's what they're voting against, gotcha. In that poll.
All right. Appreciate the call, Carlton. As always, buddy. Thank you so much.
That's just a sample of what you'll hear on the Stephen A. Smith Show. Weekdays at 1 p.m. Eastern on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app.